There are some buildings that seem alive not in the way we're alive, with blood and breath, but in a way that feels harder to explain. They breathe differently. They remember differently. They hold on to people and things long after they should have let go. The Cardinal Inn was one of those places. By the winter of 2024, most of Portland had forgotten it. The city was changing, rushing forward with glass towers and condos. Coffee shops stacked on every corner. Apartments carved out of warehouses. But the inn stayed stubborn, rotting away on its little block near the river. I wasn't from Portland. I didn't grow up with stories about the theater. Didn't sneak into shows there when I was young. All I knew was that the city was closing it down for good, demolishing it to make way for something new. One last film would be shown before the doors were chained. That, I thought, would be worth seeing. It wasn't nostalgia that drove me, but curiosity. And maybe something more, maybe a hunger for something unusual in a life that had grown too predictable. So I bought a ticket. $12 to witness the death of a theater. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that rolls down from the hills and settles like a second river over the city. Streetlights flickered through it in pale halos. And I walked alone, collar up, footsteps echoing. The closer I got to the inn, the more the street seemed to empty. The building didn't look like a theater. Not anymore. The old steeple had been ripped away in a windstorm nearly a century before, leaving it flat-topped and awkward. The once grand facade was layered in graffiti tags and cracked plaster. A single white bulb burned over the French doors, throwing out a thin, cold light that made the entrance feel less like entertainment and more like a hospital-side whinger at chapel that had lost its faith. I hesitated at the bottom of the steps. For a moment, I thought I heard voices inside. Not laughter, not chatter, just murmurs, low and steady, like the sound of water under a floor. I shook it off and climbed. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and dust, layered with the faint grease of popcorn that must have been cooked years earlier. The lobby was nearly bare, a cracked tiled floor. A few movie posters long since bleached by sunlight and vandalized by sharpest scribbles. At the center, behind a narrow wooden podium, sat the ticket seller. He was a thin man with slicked-back black hair and a smile that sat awkwardly on his face, as though someone had told him to practice it, but he'd never gotten the hang of the timing. His eyes were sharp, darting too quickly for comfort. "Good evening," he said, his accent thick, Eastern European by the sound of it. "My name is Victor. I am real American. From Cupertino, California." I almost laughed. His delivery was so mechanical it felt like he was testing me, like he wanted me to challenge him. "Cupertino," I repeated. "That's in California, right?" "Yes, California. Big place." "Sure." He leaned toward me, voice dropping. "Where are you from?" "Washington," I said, "near the Canadian border." "Ah," he said, nodding too eagerly. "I like to know about people. Do you know this theater?" "Just that it's closing." His eyes flicked sideways, as if checking for someone listening. "Yes. Last night. Condemned. Pipes broken. Water everywhere. If you need water, go somewhere else. Or buy a bottle. Not here." He chuckled to himself, though his face stayed stiff. I held out my wallet. "Just one ticket." He blinked like I'd surprised him, then nodded quickly. "Yes. Sometimes I forget I sell tickets." $12. The bill disappeared into his pocket. He slid a slip of paper across, thin and smudged with ink. As I walked past, I thought again about his strange claim Cupertino. Something about it was too deliberate, too rehearsed. I doubted he could find it on a map. But I had come for the theater, not him. The door into the auditorium groaned on its hinges. The room beyond was cavernous and dim. Its red seats faded to a brownish rust. Once, I imagined, It could hold over 100 people. Tonight, no more than a handful. Two men in dark suits sat together near the front corner, their heads bowed close in quiet conversation. Toward the back, a woman rested, dressed in a kimono that looked startlingly out of place in the middle of a Portland winter. She didn't move, didn't even glance toward me. And then there was the figure in the far back corner. At first I thought it was a mannequin left behind, a prop of some kind. He stood stiff, arms slightly out, sunglasses over his eyes, a cheap wig perched unevenly on his head. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring forward. The air was too still. There were no ads, no previews, no music to fill the silence. Only the faint hum of the projector starting up. I pulled out my phone. No service, not even a flicker. So I sat. From where I was, I could see her in my peripheral vision, the woman in the kimono. At first she seemed ordinary enough, if oddly dressed. Then I heard the sound. A soft crackle. Again. Not popcorn. Not peanuts. Pistachios. She cracked them slowly, shells falling somewhere unseen. The sound was impossibly loud in the silence. It dug into my nerves, kept pulling me from the screen. I glanced back. She moved. Not like a person, not like someone shifting in their seat. She lifted herself onto her knees and crawled over the row in front of her. Barefoot, smooth, deliberate. Then another row, and another. My throat went dry. She crawled under the row behind me, vanishing into the darkness like something reptilian, her body bending too fluidly, too gracefully. I jolted up, heart racing. The floor crackled under my shoes. I looked down. Pistachio shells. Everywhere. Covering the aisle like a carpet. They hadn't been there before. The suits in the front corner turned their heads. Eyes locked on me. Not to film me. I whispered, "Sorry," and shuffled toward the exit, each step loud in the cavernous silence. I burst into the hallway, lungs burning. Water roared. From the ceiling above, a pipe had ruptured, spilling torrents onto the cracked concrete floor. The hallway shimmered with puddles, the reflections of the weak lights making the ground seem alive. The restroom was up a short flight of stairs. I took them, gripping the rail, and pushed inside. The air was damp, thick with mold. The sinks were stained, the mirrors cloudy. I bent down, splashing water on my face except there was none. The faucet spat only a dry rattle. When I lifted my head, the mirror caught movement. A man, standing behind me, smiling faintly, waving. I spun. Nothing. The mirror was empty too. I stumbled back, heart hammering, forcing breath into my lungs. I told myself I was tired, that the woman in the kimono had spooked me, that I was letting my imagination run. But deep down I knew something else was happening, something wrong. I climbed another few steps, toward the small window where the projector cast its beam. Shadows flickered, the hum of the film reel steady. And then I saw him, seated on a chair near the booth. A mannequin, wooden, crudely painted, dressed in the clothes of a man. In its lap sat a bucket. I don't know why I looked. Some compulsion, some whisper in the back of my skull. Inside the bucket was a framed photograph. The man I had just seen waving in the mirror. Great, here's part 2, about 2,000 words of the Cardinal Inn. I'll keep expanding details, atmosphere, and tension, carrying the story forward from where we left off. I don't remember how long I stood there staring into that bucket. Maybe a few seconds, maybe minutes. My brain kept tripping over itself, trying to rearrange the facts into something reasonable. A mannequin holding a framed photo of a man who wasn't supposed to exist? A man I had seen waving in a mirror? It didn't add up. But something deep inside me whispered that I wasn't meant to stay there, that whatever else I might see if I lingered would only unmake me further. I stumbled back down the stairs, shoes squeaking on the wet concrete, and forced myself into the theater again. The film played on, halfway through its grim story. What jarred me wasn't the movie, but the room itself. It had changed. More people now. An elderly man with a little boy in the aisle seats. A couple whispering in the shadows. The whole place seemed cleaner, like the years of dust had been lifted. The graffiti scrubbed away. I rubbed my eyes. Either I was losing my mind, or something was reshaping reality right in front of me. And then Victor's words floated back. Ghosts like new people here. Maybe this was what he meant. I should have run. But instead, I sat down, convincing myself that I could endure it. That maybe I was being offered a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I'd regret leaving. For 20 minutes. Nothing happened. The film unfolded. Bjork's character inching closer to her fate. I almost believed I could settle in. That the worst was behind me. Then I smelled smoke. A cigarette. Acrid and heavy. I turned. Directly behind me. A man lounged barefoot across the row. A cigarette pinched between his fingers. Tears streaked his face as he stared at the screen. Oblivious to me. His feet bare. Dirty. Oddly paleurist on the seat directly behind my head. The smoke curled around my face, stinging my eyes. I opened my mouth to complain, but stopped. The man wasn't really there. Or if he was only partly tethered to this world. The grief in his expression was too raw, too consuming. He looked like a photograph come to life, trapped in a moment that never ended. I couldn't bear it. I got up and moved, sliding closer to the grandfather and child. The boy looked far too young for this kind of movie. When the murder scene arrived, the inevitable turn of the story, he broke down sobbing. The old man scooped him up and hurried out, their footsteps fading into silence. My chest tightened. They seemed real. But so had the smoker. So had the woman. So had the man in the mirror. And yet, the one constant remained. The standing figure in the corner. Sunglasses. Wig. Arms stiff at his sides. I still couldn't bring myself to face him. Something about him was worse than the rest. I needed air. Needed distance. I left again for the restroom, trying to shake off the smoke, the tears, the rising panic. The place hadn't changed. Still damp. Still moldy. Still echoing with the roar of the broken pipe outside. I took a spot at a urinal, just to collect myself. That's when they came. 2 men, one on each side of me, though there were 7 empty stalls available. They didn't unzip, didn't move, just stood there, stiff and silent, shoulders almost brushing mine. The longer we stood, the more unbearable it became. Their stillness infected me. My body wanted to move, to leave, but my nerves locked me in place. Finally, I forced myself back, and they stepped back too. I went to the sink. They followed, each taking a position on either side, eyes fixed on the mirrors, not blinking, not even breathing. I dried my hands and walked away. They turned with me, shoulders aligned, walking as if we were tethered together, down the stairs, into the leaking hallway. And there he was, the standing man, no longer in the corner of the theater, now facing the waterfall of broken pipes. Arms stiff, body frozen. Time itself seemed to falter. The air thickened, pressing against my chest like wet cement. The 2 men stopped with me. And then, though the standing man's lips never moved, a voice filled the hall. "I am the Cardinal," it said, deep and echoing, as though the building itself spoke. "I observe. I am the only view. You are friend here. You may find us repulsive, or you may feel our embrace." The words rattled my bones. My teeth ached from the vibration. "Would you like to dance?" The voice asked. "Would you like to sing?" I shook my head, throat locked. "You cannot sing while you look at me." The voice continued, against every instinct. My neck twisted. My eyes turned away, and the sound of music roared through the building. I've seen it all. Björk's voice. Not from the film, but from everywhere: walls, ceiling, floor. Louder than any speaker system could produce. Shaking the plaster. Vibrating the pipes. Tears sprang to my eyes. Unbidden. I didn't even like the song. But something in it clawed me open, pouring grief and beauty into me until I couldn't breathe. When the final note faded, silence fell. I turned back. The standing man was gone. So were the two men at my side. I staggered back into the theater, dazed. The seats were empty again. Every last one. The film still played, though the room felt colder, darker, lonelier. I sat, too drained to think. My thoughts ran like water, thin and meaningless. And then movement in the corner of my eye. The woman in the kimono. She emerged from the hallway I'd just left, blood dripping down her leg, soaking the hem of her robe. She didn't limp, didn't flinch. She simply stood, watching me. I stared back for as long as I could, but she didn't blink, didn't shift. Minutes passed. Then she began to walk. Slow, deliberate. When she reached the beam of the projector, she ducked beneath it, folding herself into an impossible arc, her body bending like a dancer avoiding a spotlight. Rising again, she moved closer. I couldn't move. She slid into the seat beside me, her presence heavy, the smell of iron clinging to her. She turned, face inches from mine. Her breath came hot, ragged, animal-like. I was frozen, staring blankly. She leaned closer, as if to kiss me, and then the film screamed. A shriek of pure horror ripped through the speakers. The lights blazed on. She was gone. Only Victor remained, standing by the exit, smiling faintly. "Goodbye?" he said. I couldn't speak. I just raised my hand in a weak wave and walked into the fog. I didn't look back. Not once. The fog swallowed me as I hurried down the street, my footsteps hollow on the pavement. For days afterward, I tried to convince myself it had been stress, imagination, some kind of hallucination. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? And then, weeks later, the news reported that the Cardinal Inn had been demolished. Bulldozers reduced it to rubble, paving the way for whatever soulless apartment complex would come next. But those who passed by swore they saw something strange in the wreckage. A wooden mannequin, standing tall among the broken bricks, wearing a wig, sunglasses, and always, raising one hand. I tried to forget. God knows I tried. Back at my apartment, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a hallucination. Maybe I'd dozed off during the screening, and my subconscious spun nightmares from a strange building and a stranger movie. That explanation soothed me in the daylight, when the sun broke through the winter fog and the world seemed ordinary again. But at night, I couldn't hold on to that lie. The sounds came back, first the crackle of pistachio shells, the steady roar of broken pipes, the eerie rhythm of "I've seen it all" echoing from nowhere. Then the images, a woman crawling like a lizard across theater seats, a cigarette glowing in the dark above a pair of bare feet, a wooden mannequin holding a bucket with a photograph inside. And always, at the end of these memories, I saw him, the standing figure, wig, sunglasses, arm raised. I closed my blinds tighter, stopped walking at night, and ignored the phone whenever it buzzed. I told myself I was just shaken, that the city would bulldoze the place soon and the past would settle into dust. But when the demolition came, the Cardinal Inn did not let go. The newspaper ran a small piece about the theater's destruction, barely a paragraph. An aging Portland cinema, closed for decades, finally torn down, site to be cleared for new construction. That was it. No photographs, no nostalgia. But in the weeks that followed, I overheard things. At bars, in grocery store lines, whispered between co-workers at the office, drove by the demolition site yesterday. Weirdest thing, saw a mannequin just standing there. Thought it was construction junk. But when I passed again that night, it was still upright. Same pose. Waving. Another voice. My cousin swears she saw someone watching from the rubble. A man in sunglasses. Didn't move when she honked. Creeped her out bad. And a third. It was waving at me. Just at me. Each story landed like a stone in my gut. I didn't need to see it myself. I knew. The standing man hadn't been destroyed. The Cardinal Inn itself had crumbled. But whatever spirit had claimed it was still alive. Still waiting. And in my bones. I felt the truth. Once you've been seen by the Cardinal, you never stop being seen. I've spent months trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was all ghosts. Restless spirits bound to a place steeped in neglect and decay. Maybe it was hallucination. Mass suggestion. A trick of mold spores and fatigue. Or maybe the inn was something else altogether, something older than theaters and movies. Something that only wore the skin of cinema for a while, before slipping into another shape. But here's what I can't shake. The choice of the final film. Dancer in the Dark. A story about a mother going blind. Punished for a crime she didn't commit. Condemned not because she was guilty, but because she was powerless. A story of cruelty, injustice, and violence dressed up as law. The Cardinal Inn swallowed that story and reflected it back into the lives of everyone inside. Every figure I saw, the smoker, the child, the kimono woman bleeding silently, they weren't just hauntings. They were echoes of suffering, locked in loops of pain and confusion. They were injustice made flesh. And the standing man, the Cardinal himself, was the judge, the observer, the embodiment of that cruel balance. To watch, to wave, but never to save. That is what has haunted me most. Not the pistachios, not the mannequins, not the voices in the pipes, but the way it all seemed to agree on one point. The world is unfair, and it delights in reminding us. Sometimes I walk the block where the inn once stood. There's nothing there now, just a cleared lot waiting for developers. But even in daylight, I feel him. The air thickens when I pass. My ears ring faintly, and in the edge of my vision, I swear I see a figure. Wig, sunglasses, arm raised in that endless, mocking wave. I never look directly, because I know what happens when you do. That night at the Cardinal Inn taught me something I haven't been able to shake. Horror doesn't always come with claws and teeth. Sometimes it wears the face of bureaucracy, of law, of the cold indifference of systems too large to care whether we survive. The ghosts I met weren't monsters. They were people broken by cruelty, trapped in moments where the world was merciless to them. The theater wasn't just haunted, it was a monument to injustice, a shrine to suffering replayed over and over. And maybe that's why it chose Dancer in the Dark for its last show. Not as entertainment, but as confession. So now I ask you, what do you believe? Was the Cardinal Inn truly haunted? Or was it only holding up a mirror to the violence and unfairness already baked into our lives? I want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Tell me whether you think we live in a haunted world or just one built on injustice. Take a stand. Speak your truth. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about the dead at all. They're about the living.